have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. And I do agree with the Minister that we shouldn't use hard cases to make generalisations, but that said, I am conscious of the fact that the newspapers seem to be breaking another sad case, and it comes against the backdrop of quite a number now of sad cases, even in the lifetime of this government. And while we don't and shouldn't ever justify people's opinions, what these cases do is expose to the people that women's reproductive health should not be in our constitution. It should not be something that's battled over by legal people when people are in a scenario where they're already in a crisis or traumatic situation. And I would say it's interesting that every single person who spoke in this debate said that there was a problem with the 8th Amendment. That's very significant. But many, and probably the majority, said, but we're not going to deal with it now. And I would say to those deputies, how soon is now? And when is there a right time? I mean, this is our job. This is what we're paid to do, is to legislate and change things. So I don't think it's good enough to say not now. Look, I'm in the unenviable position of trying to summarise the debate. I think the main point I'd like to make is that I don't think the vote is going to in any way reflect the discussion that we have had. I think the discussion over the past 2 days has shown, even in the course of the last year, attitudes have changed in this House, and it would be very important that we would recognise that. The legislation that was passed last year, a whole number of deputies who supported that legislation have now had the courage to come in and say that provisions in it, such as criminalisation, were wrong, that aspects of it involving a scrutiny by 6 medical practitioners were wrong. That's a good thing that those deputies have put it on the record, but if we're saying it's wrong, we have a responsibility to do something about that. Now, I want to deal with and respond to a couple of points made by Minister Varadkar last night in terms of some of the legal issues, because I'd have to say that he was wrong in some of those points and that maybe some of the aspects were a little bit of a cop-out, because the Minister made great play about the acknowledgement of the rights to bodily integrity and personal autonomy as being vague, and he said that other rights in the Constitution which were acknowledged then went on to be protected. That's actually not true, and even the rights that he read out himself don't do that. A constitution by its very nature is open, it's aspirational, it states broad principles. It's there to direct the judiciary, to give guidance to doctors, and to be followed up by more detailed legislation. The problem with the 8th Amendment wasn't that it was too vague, it was that it tried to act as a piece of legislation and detail circumstances in all instances where women should deal with abortion. So it's the actual opposite scenario in that regard, and I think the Minister was wrong about that. And he was actually wrong about the fact as well that a lot of the subsequent problems weren't obvious at the time. They actually were. And I just want to maybe deal briefly with points made by Mairead Enright, human rights law lecturer, who's pointed out that in relation to the bill that we've put forward here today, that in actual fact bodily integrity is a limited negative right. It's a right of non-interference. And by putting this in, we're replacing something at the moment which deputies have said we protect women's lives. We actually don't. We subordinate women's lives to the right of a fetus to be born, and that's removing that and instead replacing with an explicit provision and commitment to bodily integrity of born persons, and it gestures towards a new approach on this issue, because if you remove the 8th Amendment, then the whole legal landscapes change. So what follows it next? Well, you know, Mairead Enright made the point, and I kind of agree with her, in terms of what should happen next. Well, what should happen next is what happens already with many women in the early stages of pregnancies, what they do already. They get pills, but they should get them easily, on prescription from their pharmacist, at an accessible price and with access to proper care and counselling. And then in other stages later on, she put forward the model of Victoria, where the abortion legislation provides that a doctor may perform an abortion on a woman who's not more than 24 weeks pregnant for any reason, and then after that for other circumstances. So there are ways in which the follow-on, if you like, can be dealt with post the 8th Amendment. Now, I agree, and I very much welcome the fact that the Minister acknowledged that the 8th Amendment is too restrictive. I really welcome the fact that he stated clearly that our laws have given rise to a chilling effect, where he actually said that the amendment means that difficult decisions that should be made on the basis of best clinical practice are now being made on foot of legal advice. That's absolutely and utterly frightening when the Minister for Health gets up and says our laws are preventing decisions from being made in the best medical interests, and then sort of says, well, I'm out of here now, there's nothing more I can do about that. That's not good enough. When the Minister very clearly outlined that he recognised the barbarity of fatal fetal abnormalities, well, he's the Minister for Health. He can bring in legislation. There's legal opinion which says it's entirely permissible, even within the confines of the Eighth Amendment. So while I welcome the fact that he's put it on the record, there's no point in saying something needs to be done. Who's going to do it if the Minister for Health isn't going to do it? Ministers have said change is going to come in 20 years. Who's going to do it? The politicians in here. We're legislators. That's our job. And unless we tackle it now, then we are actually abdicating our responsibility. And I do think that there's no other issue where this will be allowed to wait. And not only the insult of that, but to have your face rubbed in it and said, well, look, we shouldn't really rush this. Seriously now, we shouldn't rush it when nobody of a reproductive age has had a right to have a say on this in the first place. When the 10 women today joined the 10 women yesterday who had to take that journey haven't had a say in that. And as the other deputies said, when opinion poll after opinion poll has revealed that the Irish people are supportive of abortion in a whole range of circumstances and overwhelmingly support the idea of a repeal of the Eighth Amendment. When the United Nations Human Rights Committee says that in order to adhere to our international human rights, we should look at our constitution. And when everybody in this House and every political party has now said we should look at this issue, well, let's look at it. I mean, I agree with the deputies who said that we should have a calm and measured debate, that we should be compassionate and that we need to be measured. And I agree with that, we do. Sloganeering and labelling people is not helpful and conducive to this whatsoever. But if you believe we need a debate on it, what are the government doing about it? Because the only reason we're discussing this is that we've tabled it and pushed it, and that's just not good enough. And while I appreciate the sentiment of deputies like Deputy O'Queeve, who said maybe set up a committee, we've had all these committees and constitutional conventions and everything else before. Let the people have a say. What would we be afraid of? Now, look, as I say, it is good that all the parties now are on record as saying it needs to be dealt with, so let's ensure it's in the election manifestos. We've had people saying, oh, Ireland isn't ready for abortion on demand. Now, I don't like that slogan anyway. I think it's incredibly flippant and demeaning of women, as if it's something casual that people would like to do, when it's never a decision that anybody would like to have to make. The reality is that most abortions are carried out in early pregnancy by the taking of a tablet. They're no different than a miscarriage, a bit of cramping, anything like that. Late terminations come because of serious illness, fatal fetal abnormalities and other tragedies. The point is, and the key issue here, is that that should be a choice for the woman herself. People have said, you know, nobody has the answers. We'll never agree here. And maybe that's the answer, that there is no answer. Because what's right for me isn't maybe right for the minister or isn't right for somebody else's daughter. Circumstances different for very, very different people. And our views, in actual fact, are absolutely irrelevant. All we should be concerned about doing is putting in place a regime which supports people and their decisions. It's incredibly ironic that, you know, we live in a society where we're happy for women to have jobs, to run their homes, to raise their children, to look after the elderly and the sick, to run the country, to do whatever. But we're not allowing women to make a decision about what's best for their own bodies. And that's all it is. And we're not going to go in, I'm not going to explain the reasons why people make those decisions. There are many, many varied ones, and no piece of legislation is ever going to sort that one out. But am I confident that those women will make the best decision for them? I absolutely am. And that's all that we're asking. And the right to choose to have an abortion is equally the right to choose to have a child and to be supported in that and backed up in that. So, look, I mean, I do thank the deputies who've participated. I do acknowledge that the debate has moved on, but I absolutely have to say that for us as legislators, it's not enough. We have to do something on that moving on. And sadly, for another family now, it's too late. For another 10 girls today, it's too late. Wise up to it. There is no debate about whether we should have Irish abortion or not. Irish abortion is the exact same as abortion in other countries. We just have a stifling hypocrisy that says it has to take place out of here, and that can no longer continue.
Thank you, Deputy Daly. And the question is